Okay, welcome to this webinar. This is the second one of our three-part series on smart product exploration and concept validation. And today we are going to discuss the problem space and stakeholder needs exploration. And I will start with some theory, with the drier part. We will look a bit at the system engineering theory behind the business analysis and stakeholder needs requirements. And then my colleague Thomas will take on the more juicy part on the practical implementation of these processes. And he will serve some coffee with that too. What I will discuss is this. After a short introduction, I will introduce how the system engineering standards look at business mission analysis and stakeholder needs and requirements definition. And at the end, the execution of these processes in the new exploration stage will be explained there for that. The main question actually that we address today, and you have seen the Dilbert pictures there, is actually how can we avoid doomed project by doing proper preparation of this project. What we need to address are three main questions, and these are: what do our customers and stakeholders need and want? What is the need? What can we offer to answer that need? And how can we make some money out of this? If we look at the smart product challenge that we are facing, actually the basic challenge is that we have to deal with a lot of complexity, different aspects, different disciplines that we need to cover. Now, it's obvious that smart products are not the only smart or complex product or complex system that needs to be addressed, and therefore we are going to look and use the approach that has been developed in the last decades, I would say, on system engineering of complex systems. And there have been a number of standards developed, system engineering and software engineering standards, and the most important one is the 15288, which we will use as a basic framework to address smart product development. This standard, this 15288, actually defines defines a number of system lifecycle processes. Our main focus will be on the technical processes. This is the red ones over there. These are then supported by project management processes. There are also agreement processes related to the acquisition of the goods and the parts and the service that we need when we create products, and the supply processes related to supplying the final product to the customer. And also, of course, we have all the processes related to the organization that is doing the product life cycle management and the development of the product. So our focus is on the technical processes, and in this part of the webinar we look at the business analysis and the stakeholder needs and requirements definitions, which are the two first processes of the series of 14 technical processes. And they are really, let's say, the preparation work we need to do before we can actually start developing new processes. So the first basic technical process is the business mission analysis, and the purpose of that process is threefold. First of all, we have to define the business or mission, problem or opportunity. We have to characterize the solution space, and we have to determine the potential solution classes that could address a problem or take advantage of an opportunity. It is very important that, and that's why I put some words in bold, the meaning of the words in these standards is of great importance. Definition is not the same as identification. For example, characterize a solution space, that is not the same as defining a solution. It is identifying the characteristics of the solutions space. Yeah, this will become clear in the next slide what it actually means. But also, if you look at the solution classes, this is a class of solution, not the solution itself. But it becomes more clear what the difference is in this terminology. Now, the first, there is some starting point of an business analysis, and it always starts with the organization that takes the initiative to address a certain opportunity or a problem. And that organization, in a broad sense, can be the company, a commercial company. It can be a non-profit organization, but it could also be a business unit of a company, a department, or even an individual. Now, then we have to look at all the aspects of the organization that can play a role in defining the viability of a business opportunity. And these aspects are, first of all, the vision of that organization. What is the vision of the organization on how it's positioned itself in the world, in society, positioned in the big picture? What is its mission? Why do we do what we do? What is the ambition? Where does the organization want to go to? What is its strategy and tactics? How does it prepare for future and how it intends to achieve its goals? The concept of operation, that is the way the organization intends to work or is working. What is acceptable for the organization? It's different for a production facility, which is oriented towards producing products. The way of working is different than for example, a service provider. And then, of course, we have the assets, the know-how, the competences, the capabilities, resources, and the people that are in the organization. And there are then other things like the history or other elements that needs to be taken into account in order to be able to validate the viability of a certain opportunity for the organization. And that's actually then the organizational fit of the opportunity we are addressing. Another aspect of input is that we can distinguish between two types of, let's say, business initiators. One type is, I would call it, a need looking for a solution. So there is a request, a stakeholder need that is come up and has been identified. And the plus here is that we have more or less a bit of a head start on the stakeholder needs assessment, since it's clear that there is some need that has already been expressed. The key question we need to answer then here is, can we provide a solution for that need? And that's then the solution space exploration we have to perform. But that is not sufficient. We have to further establish better understand the problem, the context of that need, and that's then the problem space exploration. But there can be another initiator, and that would be something like a solution looking for a need. This could be for a research organization like IMEC. This is the typical situation. We have a lot of solutions, but who can make use of this? Or as a company, you have certain capabilities, certain technologies, which you think you can make more money out of it. So what is the head start here? We have already some idea on the solution. Parts of the potential solution are available, but the key question is, what kind of problem of need can we answer with that solution? So that's the basic problem space exploration question. But of course, it's not sufficient to have some idea of a console or having the technology in the lab. So also the solution space needs to be further explored, and you have to understand how the solution can be used, what could be the life cycle concept, and what are clearly the stakeholder needs related to that solution. There is more which we have to take into account. Another aspect is the context of the organization. What is its ecosystem? In what region are we operating? What is the environment? Environmental issues, society is an element that needs to be taken into account. Market competition and regulation, standardization, law, all are important to take along in the analysis. And then we can also look at different problem contexts in which we can distinguish between three important categories. We may have to deal with an internal problem or opportunity in the organization itself. For example, if we want to upgrade our production facilities towards Industry 4.1, we are dealing with an internal problem. We may have a problem where we, or an opportunity where we are going to provide a customized solution for a specific external customer. For example, if we are a product development company, we may have to develop a certain smart product for an external customer, or we are a constructor, we need to build a house or a bridge for a specific application of a specific customer. And then, of course, we have the product or services that are towards that goes to a market of customers at which we do not know from the beginning who will exactly be the customer. So this gives another way of addressing the needs of potential customers and users. And then there are all kinds of constraints we have to take into account, which come from the environment, the organization itself, the project limits we have, and certain life cycle concept, and it can be many more. I added here also a view on how the system engineering handbook, for which you saw the picture a few slides ago, describes the inputs of the business mission analysis, and it summarizes more or less what I have been explaining in the last few slides. You see the strategy of the company, the way it's going to work. Source documents are all kinds of information about the organization which are relevant, and then you see here the constraints listed. Now, what are the activities that needs to be executed in the business mission analysis according to the system engineering standards? First of all, preparation, and all the technical processes start with a preparation task, and it always starts with the definition of the strategy of the execution of the specific technical processes. And so in this case, the business mission analysis strategy, and also the acquirement of or the acquisition of the enabling systems and services that we need to execute the technical process that we have at hand. So it's obvious that this needs to be done before you can start the actual execution of the business analysis in this case. Besides that, specifically for the business analysis, it's good to have a look inside the organization and look where are internal problems, opportunities, and gaps that need to be addressed. For example, where are we today versus where do we want to go? That can be a gap that needs to be addressed. Then we can start the actual work in the business analysis. That starts with the definition of the problem and opportunities space, which includes the analysis of these problems in the context of so-called trade space factors. And trade space factors are everything that is relevant for this business analysis. That can be internal aspects like the changes in mission of the company, but also external, obviously, like business opportunities or improvements required by customers, but also the environment, the changes in regulations. Pestel and Thomas will explain what that is. Once you have done the analysis, it is worthwhile to clearly describe and define what the problem is or the opportunity is that you're going to address. And that can be done, for example, in a clear statement. And I think that is quite important to have a common understanding of the problem. Otherwise, one may go into different directions if one is not on the same line in actually what problem is being addressed. Now, the problem statement is looking to the problem without looking to a solution. How you can going to solve it. It looks at the context, looks at the constraints, but not how you're going to solve that. That comes later. The next step is the characterization of the solution space, and this consists of three. It starts with three aspects. That is identifying the major stakeholder groups. The groups can be who is the customer, who is the user, who will be involved in the production, etc. We have to define the so-called OPSCON or operation concept. That is the way the system is going to work and how it's going to interact with the users. And then we have all the other life cycle aspects, like how we're going to acquire all the services and goods that we need, how we're going to deploy the system, develop it, support it, etc., etc. And then based on that, we can define a complete set, as comprehensive as possible, of alternative solution classes. Again, these are classes, categories of solution classes. In the previous webinar, we have used the example of the coffee machines, a manual system, a vintage like the Senseo like, or the complicated smart barista types. These are different solution classes, but they are not yet the definition of the solution itself. These solutions classes need to be evaluated and then selected which one are the preferred one. And this we have to validate against our organization, mission, strategy, all these things we have listed before that, to see whether these solution classes are valid, viable for our company. And all these things, and that's always also something which always comes back. We have to manage, and there are two important aspects in that management. That is providing so-called baseline information, the basic information that will be needed throughout the life cycle of the system we are developing, and then having the traceability of that information to what it is linked. How does a certain solution, for example, links to a certain problem? The outcomes of the business mission analysis are the following. We have the problem opportunity space defined. The solution space is characterized. We have a first idea of the operational concept and the other lifecycle concepts. We have candidate solution classes identified and analyzed. We have selected the preferred ones out of that. And we create a business requirement specification which states or specifies what we expect from a business point of view from the opportunity or problem we are going to address. And we have all these management aspects covered. Again, I show you here the output list of the business mission analysis according to the engineering handbook. You see a few more aspects in there, some like for example the preliminary MOE, that stands for measures of effectiveness. So there's already how can you measure these things, and here are the business requirements mentioned also. And I would like to or better define what these business requirements are. So the business requirements are actually the business framework within which all the stakeholders will work and define their requirements. It's really setting the boundary conditions in which the business case needs to be developed. And that's the way it also governs the project. Everything related to agreements, constraints, quality standards, cost and schedule. This really specifies how the company wants to work in the problem assessment, problem finding the solutions for certain problem and creating the business itself. And then this can be captured in a document, a business requirement specification, or a document that is being of is approved by the leadership itself. Now, this is something which is not explicitly required by the system engineering standards, but I think it's really a recommendation to write something down, which is clearly stating what are the for the framework in which the product development needs to be done. Then we can go to the stakeholder needs and requirements definition. The second technical process and in which is the purpose of that one. That is to define the stakeholder requirements for a system that can provide the capabilities needed by users and other stakeholders in a defined environment. So the ultimate goal is to clearly define the requirements of the stakeholders, and this needs to be or need to address the needs for that. And that's the whole purpose of this technical process. The inputs here are actually the outputs of the outcomes or the outcomes of the business analysis processes which we have listed. So it is the business requirement specification and especially also the constraints that are imposed on the solution by the system lifecycle, concept project, organization, etc. Again, I give here the inputs according to the handbook itself for a reference. Then let's go and have a look at the activities. As I already explained, we always start with the preparation, the strategy of addressing the stakeholder needs and requirements and the enabling systems, and the identification of the stakeholder, which is actually a part of the business mission analysis, where we have these first categories of stakeholders identified. Then we start to define the stakeholder needs, starting with the definition of the context of use of the intended system, identify the stakeholder needs, prioritize them, and then down select them so that it's a tractable number. And then here you see the difference or the importance of the difference. We do or execute the definition of the stakeholder needs and can create a stakeholder needs statement with its rationale, why that is important, why these are priority needs, etc. Next step is that the concept, the operational concept and the life cycle concept are further developed. We started in the business analysis process with the first preliminary ideas. Here we're going to expand that and elaborate on that and for example, define a representative set of scenarios that are going to be used to assess all the capabilities that the system will need or will have to have or will have to have to address the needs of the stakeholders and the user. And important here also the interaction between the users and the system itself. Then the stakeholder needs need to be transformed into stakeholder requirements. And the difference between a need and a requirement is that a need is an expression of something that is wanted. A requirement is a statement which can be verified. We used before in the previous session the example of we want quality coffee. That's a need, but it's not a requirement because you cannot measure quality as such. A requirement could then be it must be fair trade coffee of a premium brand. That is a requirement which can be verified, and that's the difference between a need and a requirement. For this transformation, we have to identify the constraints on the system solution. We have to define or identify the critical quality characteristics, things like safety, health impact, security, reliability, robustness, name it, which are important. We need to address those, and then we can define the stakeholder requirements. We have to analyze those requirements and ask feedback to the stakeholder and resolve any requirement issues, whether they are, for example, is it okay for the stakeholder that quality is translated into fair trade and premium brands? That, for reason, it's something which you have to get agreement on. And then also you have all the, well, you have to get the agreement and then manage traceability and baseline info. This results in a list of outcomes. The stakeholders are identified, the lifecycle concepts, characteristics, and context of use is defined, the system constraints are identified, the stakeholder needs are defined. We have prioritized them and transformed them into requirements. We have some critical performance measures defined. That is, how can we measure, check whether the requirements, verify whether the requirements are met. And obviously the stakeholder is in agreement that the needs are reflected in the requirements. And all this is then put together in a stakeholder requirements specification. And as usual, we have all the management done for it. And for completion, I give you the list according to the handbook of the outputs of the stakeholder needs and requirements definition process. Now, these processes are executed in the new product exploration, a part of the development lifecycle that we show here, shown you in last webinar, also starting from ID, going to the customer. We can define an exploration phase that is aligning with the concept phase according to system engineering standards. We have a planning phase that goes or that plans the actual product development part. So how does it work there? Starting from the first ideas, the inputs we have defined, we start up the business analysis process where we do the problem solution space exploration. We define preliminary lifecycle concept and identify the stakeholders. This results in a list of outcomes and the business requirement specifications, which forms the input for the stakeholder needs and requirements definition process, where we further develop the stakeholder needs, define the stakeholder needs, the lifecycle concept and the requirements, translate that into or document that in a stakeholder requirement specification, which forms the input of the system requirements process. But this one is actually part of the new product planning stage. But in this exploration stage, we will start preparing for it. strategy enabling systems as always, but also look at the first concept of the system itself and its feasibility. So, but besides these basic two core technical processes, we have to prepare all the processes, the technical as well as the agreement process for the full life cycle, look at the constraints which are imposed on the development, on the life cycle processes and on the requirements we are specifying, and also on the availability of competences, capabilities, etc. And this all is then brought together into a validated concept, which, if acceptable, forms the starting point for the system requirements and the new product planning stage. Do not forget that this is typically an iterative process, so that you will have to regularly go back and adapt previous requirements to get to a satisfying result. All this is being described in a guideline we are preparing and which will be later this year made available to all those that are interested. And this ends my presentation. And now I go back to Thomas.
Thank you, Geert. I'll share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Geert, and welcome everyone. I'm just going to continue where Geert already was talking about. So basically, the challenges that go along with smart product exploration. So today we're talking about problem space and stakeholder needs exploration. So the last webinar, we took an example of a smart coffee machine. So going from between brackets an ordinary coffee machine to a smart coffee machine by adding certain intelligence like sensors, communication, artificial intelligence. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways we could approach this. You could add a smartphone application that can tell you, for example, that your coffee is ready, but you could go for automatic inventory control, automated maintenance. You could add some personal preferences, but long story short, I think what actually is happening is that you have, as an ordinary coffee machine producer, you basically have a set of competences and customers and suppliers, and once you actually add all of that functionality, part of those competences or whatever are actually going to start becoming new. So new capabilities necessary to, for example, to develop these sensors or communication. That means that you need new suppliers, you might partner up with new people. So it's actually that transition from something that we all know to something that is, let's say, new, which makes having a sort of a structure better, and that's the reason actually also the COOCK Smart Products project actually started. So basically, as Geert said, we base ourselves on the ISO standard because it's, let's say, the only actually common framework to talk about any type of system smart product innovation or exploration. We've divided those in, let's say, 5 phases that happen in that exploration phase, starting with business requirements and ending basically with a sort of an exploration on what types of systems could actually be used in order to achieve a certain result. So this is not yet actually, let's say, development or introduction of anything. It's sort of a problem research, and once we have, let's say, well-defined problem, we can start doing some actual product research. So all of this is not really a linear process. It makes it seems like it is, but you need the first step sort of to go to the next step. So you will always start from a business reason of business requirements and evolve to stakeholder needs. With these needs, you can start coming up with, let's say, concepts. These concepts, if you once validated, can lead to requirements. These requirements in a later phase can then become, first of all, systems, but also actual specifications. So even though it's not a linear process, we mapped it linearly, but know that it's iteratively, and of course, work and insight from these phases have to be aligned with previous works. So basically what we actually see is that the product or the knowledge that we have about that product that we want to create is maturing with every phase. So today we're talking about the first two things, the business requirements and stakeholder needs, but I just want to mention again that a validated concept is creating the whole story. So that goes about, it's not just the product itself and the functionality, it's about how are we as a organization going to develop it? Do we have the capabilities or competences? What are we going to do end of life? How do we box it or distribute it? It's a business model. It's basically everything that goes along with it. So we also have to validate each of those things in one way or another. Sometimes we're already sure and we don't really need to test anything, but some other, let's say, aspects can come with certain risks, and it's this risks that we try to de-risk via this exploration phase and via the validations that we do. So basically, the goal at the end of that validated concept is to be sure that our concept or smart product ID is desirable. And so is a user actually interested in this product, that it is feasible? Are we as an organization able to make it? Is the technology actually ready? Do we have the expertise? And then, of course, viable. Is there a way that we can make money with, of course, but is the market ready? What does the competition do? How is it evolving? What does the ecosystem look like? So as you can see here, it is more clear that this is really iterative process where we actually are looking at a problem that we try to solve. That's a solution. That solution has to plug in, of course, to needs that are actually expressed by, let's say, stakeholders, and that actually cycles around and round. So today, we're going to look at mainly the business and stakeholder needs, and not really to validating an actual concept, but just the steps that we take and what reason and how do we do it as a sort of a business and stakeholder needs. And then the concept validation is for the next webinar. So what we're going to do is explore what we need as a business and what our, let's say, stakeholders needs, our clients, but also internal stakeholders, or even what the government actually requests us. And those insights help us decide on the right concept or the right solutions. So basically, I'm starting with business requirements. As the Geert said, basically what we try to do is analyze and define what the problem opportunity space is. That can be a push or a pull. And we try to characterize actually how the solution might look like. So that's actually the solution space. In order to do so, we look at all relevant trade space factors. Now that seems a little bit maybe cryptic, but basically business requirements is not only looking at the organization itself, it's also looking at everything in the ecosystem of a company. And of course, the context, things like legislation and certification or intellectual properties are of course also important when making these decisions. So I've made a list of steps or activities that take place as we do this business requirement definition. Basically, I'm going to talk a little bit about, or much, I don't know, about mission, vision, and strategy, about the competition, and then point out to SWOT analysis, and then also PESTEL, as Geert already said. But there's, of course, more to it. There's actually a lot of steps or activities that can take place, and depending on your need, you fill them in how it's necessary, of course. So let's start with the organization. Yeah, basically, you start from a mission. And you have a reason for doing business, and that reason can lead to actually having a vision on where you see yourself in, let's say, near or long future. So that's the position of that company there. And of course, that basically gives way to ambition. And then we actually have the strategy, and the strategy is a choice made by the organization in between, let's say, an infinite amount of options that we could do, and that, of course, with the hopes of succeeding. Innovation and like smart products is basically only just one of the options that a company has in achieving certain strategic goals. Now, I have a lot of slides, so excuse me, I'm gonna just run through some. I made actually examples for the smart coffee machine, but I'm afraid I will not have the time. But for people actually interested, I will briefly discuss them so that maybe if you look at the video, you can actually see it. So the mission of that that coffee machine maker could be that they want each household and every small company to experience quality and sustainable coffee with the focus on that quality and sustainable. So the vision is that they want to be a luxury brand with a, let's say, strong focus on sustainability and having a local impact. The strategy then is of course to produce locally in Belgium, but we could actually focus also as well on adding services to improve experience, and of course maybe also create new revenue streams. Now this doesn't mention smart at all, it just says that they want to focus, for example, on value adding services, and technology could be one of the solutions in order to achieve that. But of course you could go in other ways as well. To come up with a good strategy, I have a tool here, a method here, it's called the strategy choice cascade. It's an exercise that you can actually execute in order to come up with a good strategy. I'm not going to go into detail here. It's just a way to basically describe or come up with one. But other parts that are very important for the organization is that, you know, you don't always just innovate because you want to innovate. Often innovation comes out of, let's say, improvements. So certain performances that could go better, or a certain lack of a system in a portfolio. So these could also all lead to, let's say, coming up with a set of requirements from the organization in order to, let's say, innovate. The same can come from, let's say, newer ideas where you come up with a certain, as a business or as an organization, or also a department or even individual, to come up with a concept of operation. So there's a sort of a preliminary scenario or use case of let's say, future or desired product. So that could be a scenario for how you could use or operate it, but it can also be how the way you would produce it or deploy it, support, retire it. I mean, there's a lot of choice in these things, but these are all very relevant aspects to think of when coming up with a good strategy that give way for innovation. As Geert already mentioned, so PESTEL, I think, is a very important, let's say, macro level way of to analyze the, let's say, problem opportunity space, and this is of course in context of all of these, let's say, trade space factors, excuse me. So the PESTEL analysis just tries to identify these macro, often external forces that face the organization. So it's a situational analysis. You monitor this and you could respond to changes in that macro environment. So the focus, of course, lies in identifying changes that could affect positively or negatively the future business. I also did that for the coffee machine. So, I mean, they're not per se the best analysis, but you could, for example, see opportunities in eco-design or sustainability becoming increasingly important in society. You could take the, let's say, new technologies like off-the-shelf smart components as a technology change, but you can also go to new technologies in, let's say, recycled materials, etc. Yeah, it's an interesting technique. There's also a list here of typical techniques that you use. I think it speaks a little bit for itself that IP is a very good thing to keep an overview of, because IP submissions give sort of a way in which the technology is evolving, or which trends are becoming relevant, or which technology is becoming readily available without IP protection as well. You could I typically also literature review, and then there's a whole list of trends that you could follow and good websites to follow them up. The goal is to add all trends and interesting websites, but I think I want to refer, for example, technology-wise, that you have the IMEC Digimeter that show how let's say, adoption of the technology is taking place within Flanders. Next to that, we can do SWOT analysis. Now, SWOT is sort of looking at more of a micro instead of a macro external factors. We basically look at what smaller external factors are influencing the organization and the business doing. And so you can do a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's a situational assessment. You can do this for a lot of things, for a lot of purposes. So it could be, you can do this for the project that you want to define. You could do that for the organization as a whole. You can actually do that for your competition as well. I mean, there's a lot of SWOTs that you could do. You have to pick which one you actually need to do and then do a good analysis of that. I've also felt that in for a smart coffee machine, we're not gonna add to that. Next to that, of course, looking to what your competition is doing is, of course, very relevant. Definitely, if you're going from, let's say, ordinary coffee machines and you want to go to smart coffee machines, it might be interesting to look whether there's actually new competitors in this type of market, or what your actually direct competitors are doing. So which solutions are there and where is the market or technology moving towards? So again, IP analysis is a very good way to look at your direct competitors or identify new ones in terms of the new technology that you want to implement. But if, again, desk research, and there's a whole set of canvases and frameworks that you could actually also use. Another one is the market size, to give an idea of is this is where we're heading. The idea that we have is that something that would, let's say, be profitable. It's an early analysis, it's preliminary, but it's already gives way to making early decisions whether this would be profitable or not. One of the techniques to do so is sum. You can do the total addressable market. So for coffee machines, I will take the coffee machine example. We have 58 million coffee machines sold worldwide. If we then look at, let's say, Flanders, 150,000 coffee machines are sold each year. And then if we look at what might be our market share, or what we could, let's say, ideally obtain as a market share, then this is a number that I made up, but you could say that maybe 20,000 are sold to in companies that are maybe in our niche or in our user segment. Or so as a last one in the business requirements, I mean, there's a lot of information going from the actual organization having a need to, let's say, innovate as a strategy, maybe in improvements, maybe in new concept of operation. So what we want to do, or what we want to end up with, is a sort of a problem opportunity statement that is stating it's basically a translation of that opportunity space to, let's say, a preliminary operational concept that can characterize the actual solution space where we want to actually look at. So we try to identify the major stakeholders here. In the case of this statement, we look at the users and customers, but in the same thing, you also should identify internal stakeholders, organizations, or even partners. So the problem opportunity statement should be actionable and should really describe a quite clear and unique vision on where to move forward to, that of course characterizes the solution space. And it should be sort of a starting point to guide your project in a certain direction and specific users or stakeholders. And this could also be used as a reference for evaluating later solution options. So I filled that in for the coffee machine, but I'm gonna just head off to the next because it's already quite late. Stakeholder needs. Yeah, basically what we do is we have this business requirement phase that comes, the goal here is to basically scope what the project is and what are the objectives are, and based on that we can actually analyze who will be involved in that solution space that we just characterized and what their expectations are, of course. So the stakeholder needs analysis serves as our primary input to actually create the right product. That means that we're actually solving or fulfilling a need. Now, if you look at what the stakeholder needs, and actually Geert mentioned all of them already, is it looks like this. So we already identified, let's say, major stakeholder group. Now we're trying to dive deeper in identifying these stakeholders. We can then come up with, say a context of view, where will that coffee machine be used? And of course, a concept of use, like how will it be used? Stakeholders have certain constraints that might seem weird, but for example, internal stakeholders, but also, let's say, partners or suppliers might not be able to produce certain, let's say, technology elements in the way that we desire them. So there are definitely constraints, so they should be taken into account. And when we have all of that, we can actually go to identifying the actual needs and hopefully fulfilling or coming up with a solution that then fulfills those needs, so we can come up with requirements. Now, this is also sort of an iterative process where concept of use and stakeholder needs are, of course, something where the one learns from the other. But you need to start with a certain use case in order to actually come up with, let's say, good activities to validate or to identify needs. If we're just looking into infinity in hope to identify a need, that would be, I think, very laborious with little output. So we need to come up with a concept of use in the way that the product or our idea or concept is intended to be used. So certain definition of function, capabilities, and how it would be operated. I'm going to start with identification of stakeholders. As I mentioned, there's a lot of them. You have internal stakeholders, so that's the organization. You have the ecosystem, so that's suppliers, partners. You have the actual customers, users, operators, system owners, who know what. And so people that will actually be interacting with your product. And then, of course, as a last stakeholder, you have society and the environment, but also, for example, legal barriers. So the goal of this identification process is to get in every stakeholder's point of view for each of the life cycle stages. That means, again, we're not only talking about the coffee machine itself. We need to produce that coffee machine. We need to distribute that. We need to support that. And then at the end, it has to be end of life. So how do we get rid of it? So the goal is that we try to answer the following questions. Who are they? What is their role in the project, and how do we manage these relations? What information do they require from us if necessary? How do we communicate, and what is their power in making certain decisions? Now, there's a whole set of techniques to identify stakeholders. What I've done here is not really the way that you can identify them. I think it's quite difficult to create techniques to do so, but to map them depending to actually characterize these stakeholders. So it's quite known, an influence interest matrix is sort of a perceptual map as well, where we have each stakeholder and we map them in a quadrant based on their influence and their interest in the project. But you have more of them. I think some of the interesting ones, for example, is I have the example actually of the influence interest matrix. So you can here for the coffee machine see that the ones that we need to keep satisfied are, of course, users, but you, of course, also have an R&D department, production, sales. So we need to keep them informed on how we evolve. So the goal is, of course, to capture what they need or what they expect and what constraints they give. The same goes, we can make personas, might be known as well for you. So basically characterizing certain stakeholders. Often we do this with users to empathize with them. But you could do that for any stakeholder. I filled that in as well. And then, of course, we can also often more for let's say end user customers or operators is that we can also start segmenting the market itself. We can do that based on demographics, geographics, behavioral, or psychographic. I think this is more relevant for B2C. But of course, if you have a B2B market, you can do the same segmentation technique. But of course, demographically, you change. Instead of going for gender or age, you go for the company size or type, the industry that they're active in, etc., etc. Once we identified these stakeholders, and as I said before, we have to come up with certain concepts, use cases, concepts of how our ID or product ID would actually operate. So that I call that operational concepts. So basically, these are scenarios of the product lifecycle concepts. They describe the function of the system in any aspect, in every lifecycle stage, depending on what you focus on, which helps, of course, preparing, but also setting objectives in regards to capturing stakeholder needs. There's quite a lot of techniques to do so. I have here a storyboard. I believe these are the techniques, but I'll show you the storyboard first. So this is the storyboard of a coffee machine being used. So this is a good way to show an operational concept. And of course, you focus in on the aspects that are novel, that you actually want to validate, of course. But there's a whole set of brainstorming techniques. And there's, of course, also a whole set of techniques to actually specify or, let's say, visualize or describe that system. So storytelling, could be a use case diagram, could be a storyboard. The one I showed here is a storyboard, by the way. Before we go to actually capturing needs, what we do within IMEC, which is it's a framework called Innovatrix or the Innovation Matrix. It's basically a canvas, innovation canvas that helps you gather and validate, let's say, assumptions that go along with innovating. So we have 8 criteria, reasoning starting from customer segment and then going into what that segment needs, does today, what we are proposing as a value for them, and then of course how the solution looks like. So this is basically, you can translate those operational concepts into the Innovatrix, and what we then do is we reason from that from the most important stakeholder segments. It seems like it's only customer focused, but in fact, if let's say government, which not directly involved, or certain suppliers or partners are important, you can actually also reason from these stakeholder segments. What we do is we map assumptions under each of the criteria for each of the segments, and then by doing so we can actually identify which assumptions are critical in order to succeed, and then define activities where we hopefully can validate or invalidate them step by step. So it actually sets focus to your research or your efforts. So it's an assumption-based philosophy. We map these assumptions on these 8 criteria for any innovation project. We actually have adaptations depending on certain industries or branches of technology, but these are valid for each innovation until now. We've been using this for over 10 years. Then, of course, we come to actually eliciting the stakeholder needs. Like, as I said, if we identify these assumptions, the things that we really need to debunk, let's say about the needs that we foresee stakeholders to have, then we can, of course, go and capture directly or indirectly the stakeholder needs by, first of all, you can basically directly interact with the stakeholder, or you can do desk research to actually find implicit needs. So what we want to know is, of course, what the challenges for these stakeholders are, how do they deal with this problem today, and what would actually create value for them. There's a lot of techniques here. I put on the ones that speak for itself. Like, interviews are a very direct way of interacting, so it's a sort of an explicit need, the capturing of the needs, but you have a lot more. And then, of course, you have also implicit ways to actually capture stakeholder needs. Let's say, for example, Belgium is actually aging quite fast, so we could actually identify needs related to the fact that Belgium is aging quite quickly. I actually make quite a lot of content around good interviews. I think it's a very important. Stakeholder needs to do this correctly, can help steer the project or the product in the right way. So I've basically made a short presentation on how to do good interviews. So it starts, of course, with these research goals. These research goals could come from your Innovatrix assessment, could come from the business requirement documents. Now, based on those goals, you can create a topic guide. That topic guide will structure the interview, and then you need an informed consent. It's very important these days. And then, of course, you have some interview techniques that you can use to actually make better interviews. So the first two, the goals, are the objectives of the interview, and this can, of course, differ depending on the stakeholder you're actually interviewing. And then we have the topic guide. So the topic guide, I think, is very important because it makes sure that you stay neutral. First of all, you follow the questions in the topic guide, you follow the topics, and normally you define how much time you wish to spend on each topic. In general, for each interview I've already created, I always follow the same way of building up a story. So we start very broad and we introduce the topic, and then we ask our respondents how they currently, let's say, set coffee or digest coffee. And then, of course, we go into what is currently not working well, what challenges do we face, and then we evolve to, okay, if you could come up with a solution, how would that look like? This gives way to opportunities, and you see that we start with problem opportunities, and at the last set we can actually confront them with the ideas that we have around this innovation. So these are our operational concepts that we defined earlier. Questions always should follow a logical flow. It's very important. I've added the slides about the funneling technique. In general, the funnel techniques just says you start very broad and you just go the step by step more specific. This means open up, do very open questions, tell me about, explain to me, describe to me. So these are not yes or no answers. And then of course, when they mention things, you can start probing these things that they mentioned, or you could go more specific into the topic. You should avoid yes, no answers. And then of course, there's a list of, you should always go general before specific, but you should also ask first about what they do rather than how do they feel about something. And so behavior before attitude, etc. As a last thing, the informed consent is very important. This might get you into problems also GDPR wise. And then there's a few interview techniques that I would like to mention. I'm not going to say everything, but to get acquainted with your respondent before actually doing the interview is important because they open up. Be very aware of bias. People tend to answer unconsciously by the way that they are questioned. So trying to stay neutral and also trying to prevent them being pushed in a certain direction is very important. And next to that, yeah, use silence, body language, very important, and always ask more or play dumb about the topics you're interested in. As a last, these needs are elicited. You have, let's say, written down interviews. You have to sort of draw conclusions. Now, there's not a very straightforward way of analyzing interviews or literature review, so I've actually skipped that. But once you have a whole list of, let's say, needs and challenges that were expressed by stakeholders in interviews or in surveys or implicitly by research, you can basically start transforming these into, let's say, a list of most important needs. So there's a few techniques here, like the Moscow prioritization, but you could use you could also filter based on the project scope, functionality that you foresee, testability, etc., etc. So these are all techniques to basically make a priority out of certain needs that were expressed. That's basically it. I don't know whether there are questions. I'll maybe wait 30 seconds or 10 seconds if someone has a question. Let me quickly see if there's a hand. No, then I'll continue. So basically we have one more webinar planned at the moment, which is the 17th of June, where we go into the solution spaces. So now we've basically have a list of needs. Now we're basically coming up to actually defining life cycle concept and actually testing or validating these. This is the 17th of June. You can expect things to come along, like rapid prototyping, how to business model, testing techniques like Wizard of Oz, defining critical performance measures in a later stage, and system exploration, for example, to enabling systems or certain technologies. As a last, but not maybe unimportant, if you are interested to have our project results or this presentation and the expertise that we have to have it implemented in your project, there's two, well, for Flemish companies at least, there's actually a way to do to have a very well subsidized consultancy from our part. So you can actually have either 2 days of orientation where we help you explore the problem opportunity space. So that's basically what we've done today or presented today. So it's basically IMEC will use their innovation board and also the maturity scan to actually help you, let's say, explore or orient yourself into what direction you could go in terms of smart technical components. And there's a 3-day concept validation offer as well. So the prices are there. Definitely contact us, and these are our contact details. So thank you very much. This was my presentation.